James Carter was a U.S. Army veteran who had survived war zones, sleepless nights, and years of service to his country. But what he didn't expect was that his toughest battle would come from the people, who were supposed to protect his neighborhood. The started with a strange smell. At first, James thought it was coming from a neighbor's trash. But as days passed, the odor grew worse. Soon, murky water began seeping into his yard. His gut told him it was a sewer problem. James did what any responsible homeowner would do. He called the HOA. After all, sewer maintenance was their responsibility. He paid his dues every month, trusting that when something went wrong, the association would step in, but the HOA board brushed him off. "It's not our issue, Mr. Carter," they said flatly. "That's your responsibility." James was stunned. How could an underground sewer line, shared by multiple homes, suddenly become his problem? Weeks passed, the damage spread, and then the city got involved. Repairs were mandatory, and the bill landed squarely on James's shoulders, $8,000. That's how much this decorated veteran was forced to pay, not because of what he did wrong, but because his HOA refused to do its job. But what James didn't know then was that this fight was only beginning. James Carter wasn't just another homeowner in suburban Virginia. He was a man who had given 20 years of his life to the United States Army, a tall, broad-shouldered veteran in his early 50s. James carried himself with quiet dignity. His neighbors often saw him mowing the lawn with military precision, the American flag waving proudly in the front yard, a reminder of his service and sacrifice. After retiring from the Army, James had finally bought a home where he could settle down with his wife, Linda, and their golden retriever, Max. The house wasn't the biggest on the block, but to James it was perfect. A small garden out back, a garage for his tools, and a quiet street where he could finally breathe. When he signed the papers, the realtor mentioned the HOA. "Don't worry," she said with a smile. "They keep the neighborhood beautiful. They take care of common areas, landscaping, even sewer lines and infrastructure. It's peace of mind. Peace of mind." That's what James thought he was paying for every month when the HOA dues were deducted from his account. After years in combat zones, he wanted nothing more than stability and security. And at first it seemed fine. One humid summer evening, James noticed something odd. A foul smell lingered near the side of his property. At first, he assumed it was just a neighbor's trash cans left out too long. But over the next few days, the smell grew stronger. Soon, patches of his lawn turned soggy. When Max the dog bounded across the yard, his paws splashed into waterlogged grass. James knelt down and frowned. This wasn't rainwater. Something was wrong underground. Being the responsible man he was, James didn't waste time. He contacted the HOA office first thing the next morning. The woman on the phone, polite but dismissive, took down his complaint. "We'll look into it, Mr. Carter," she assured him. Days turned into a week. Nothing happened. The smell worsened. Linda began complaining that it was drifting into the house, especially at night when windows were open. Neighbors started to notice too. "Jim, what's going on with your yard?" one of them asked, holding his nose, embarrassed. James repeated what the HOA had told him. They were looking into it. But in his gut, he felt they weren't doing anything. Frustrated, James attended the next HOA meeting. He wasn't a man who liked confrontation, but his patience was running thin. Standing tall in the small community hall, he addressed the board directly. "There's a sewer line issue behind my house. It's leaking into my yard. This is a community line. You're responsible for it. I need you to handle it before it becomes worse." The board president, a stern woman named Carol Green, adjusted her glasses and replied coldly, "Mr. Carter, we've inspected the area. From our review, this problem appears to be on your private property." "That makes it your responsibility." James's jaw tightened. "That line connects to at least 4 other houses." "How is it suddenly mine alone?" Carol shrugged. "That's what our inspector determined. If you don't agree, you're welcome to hire your own contractor." The meeting moved on, but James's frustration simmered. He'd faced enemy fire overseas, but here in his own neighborhood he was being stonewalled by bureaucracy. Weeks dragged by. The water in his yard grew deeper, forming muddy patches that killed the grass. Max was no longer allowed to play outside. Worse, Linda began noticing a smell inside the house coming from the basement. When James went down with a flashlight, His heart sank. A thin trickle of dirty water had started seeping through the foundation wall. The leak wasn't just an outdoor nuisance anymore, it was threatening their home itself. Panicked, James called a local plumber. After hours of inspection, the plumber shook his head. "Sir, this is a collapsed sewer line. And it's not just on your property, it runs under the street and connects to several houses. This is absolutely the HOA's job." James felt relief, finally. Proof, he contacted the HOA again, forwarding the plumber's written report. Surely now they'd take action, but the reply came 2 days later in a curt email. "Mr. Carter, while we understand your concern, our stance remains the same. Repairs are your responsibility." James couldn't believe his eyes. They were ignoring professional evidence. By September, the situation reached crisis level. The city's public works department got involved after a neighbor complained about raw sewage pooling near the sidewalk. Inspectors traced the issue back to the collapsed line behind James's home. The city official was blunt. "Sir, this needs to be fixed immediately." "If it isn't, we'll fine you for health code violations," James protested. "This isn't just my line, it's the HOAs." The official shook his head. "That's between you and them. Our paperwork lists this section as homeowner responsibility. Pay for the repair or face penalties." It was like being punched in the gut. James had no choice. He hired a contractor, and within a week, heavy machinery tore up his yard. The line was replaced, the mess cleaned. The bill, $8,047.26. James stared at the invoice, his hands trembling. He had savings, but this wiped out a huge portion. All because the HOA refused to do their job. That night, Linda slammed the letter on the kitchen table. "This is outrageous, James. You served this country, you've paid every bill on time, and now they stick you with this? We can't let it go." James rubbed his temples. "What do you want me to do? We can't fight City Hall and at the same time? They'll just bury us in paperwork?" But deep down, a fire was building. James Carter had fought bigger enemies before. Maybe it was time to stand up again, this time, against his HOA. And that's how a $4.90 smell in the grass turned into an $8,000 battle. That would change everything. But James had no idea yet just how ugly this fight was about to get. James Carter couldn't sleep that night. The sound of the repair crew's machines still echoed in his ears, and every time he closed his eyes, he saw that number flashing $8,000. 8,000 gone. In a week, just because some HOA board members decided to shrug their shoulders. The next morning he walked out to his yard. Where once there had been green grass and neatly trimmed hedges, now there was only mud, tracks from backhoes, and a gaping scar where the sewer line had been replaced. His American flag still fluttered proudly in the breeze, but for the first time, James felt ashamed that after serving his country, he was being disrespected in his own neighborhood. When Linda came out with his coffee, she said what he was already thinking. "We're not letting this go, James. They owe us every penny." James nodded. He knew she was right. But where do you start when the people standing against you aren't strangers? They're your neighbors. The following week, James began, quietly talking to people in the community. He started with Mr. Henderson, an older gentleman who lived 2 houses down. "You ever had problems with the HOA, Hank?" James asked. Henderson laughed bitterly. "Problems? They fined me $300 last year because my mailbox paint was faded. Said it was bringing down property values. I fixed it, but it left a bad taste in my mouth." "They're bullies, Jim." That word stuck with James. Bullies. He thought back to his Army days. Bullies never stopped unless someone stood up to them. One evening, James printed out copies of his plumber's report and went door to door. At first, neighbors were polite but hesitant. Nobody wanted trouble with the HOA. But when he showed them the $8,000 bill, faces changed. People gasped, some cursed under their breath. "You mean to tell me," a young mother named Karen said, "they stuck you with that cost?" "Even though it's their line?" "Exactly," James replied. "And if it happened to me, it can happen to you." That got people talking. For the first time, James realized he wasn't alone. The board, however, didn't like what they were hearing. At the next community meeting, Carol Green looked directly at James as she spoke into the microphone. We've received word that certain homeowners are spreading misinformation about the association. Let me be clear, the HOA operates by the book. Any claims to the contrary are baseless. James stood up in the crowd. Baseless? Carol, I paid $8,000 for a line that serves multiple homes. I showed you the plumber's report. You ignored it. Tell everyone here how is that my responsibility? The room went silent. Carol adjusted her papers nervously. Mr. Carter, this meeting is not the place to discuss personal grievances. Please sit down. But James didn't sit. His voice grew louder. No, people need to hear this. How many of you have paid fines for nonsense? How many of you have been threatened with liens on your homes? A few hands went up. Murmurs filled the room. Carol banged the gavel. Enough! If you continue disrupting this meeting, we will take disciplinary action against you, Mr. Carter. That word disciplinary hung in the air. James clenched his fists. Try it, he said coldly. See what happens. After that meeting, James knew the war had officially begun. Days later, he received a letter in the mail. It was from the HOA. His heart sank as he read it. Notice of violation. Your lawn is not in compliance with community standards. Immediate corrective action required. Failure to comply may result in fines up to $500, James laughed bitterly. They had destroyed his lawn with their negligence, and now they were fining him for it. It was retaliation, pure and simple, he showed. The letter to Linda. They're coming after us, he said. She crossed her arms. Then it's time to fight back. James began researching. He spent hours at night digging through HOA bylaws, community agreements, even state laws regarding homeowner associations. The deeper he dug, the angrier he became. The HOA had obligations, legal obligations, that they had clearly ignored. One evening, Linda found him at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers. What's the plan, soldier? She asked with a faint smile. James looked up. We're going to expose them, but I need allies. He called a meeting at his house. To his surprise, nearly a dozen neighbors showed up. They crowded into his living room, sipping coffee while James laid out his evidence. Here's the plumber's report. Here's the city inspector's notes. And here, he said, holding up the OS letter, is proof of retaliation. They're targeting me because I spoke up. People shook their heads in disbelief. Henderson muttered, Unbelievable. They've been getting away with this for years. Karen added, They fined me once because my Christmas lights were up 2 days past their deadline. They're out of control. That night, the group agreed they would stand with James. Together, they would demand accountability, but the HOA wasn't going to roll over. The very next week, James came home to find another letter taped to his door. This one was more serious, final. Notice, if your property remains in violation, the association will place a lien on your home and pursue legal remedies. James's hands shook as he read it. A line? They were threatening to take his house over a patch of mud they caused? He stormed into the kitchen. That's it. I'm done playing nice. Linda looked at him calmly. So what's the next move? James picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. A buddy from the army, now a lawyer. When his friend answered, James didn't waste time. Tom, I need your help. My HOA is trying to ruin me. Tom listened patiently. As James explained everything, finally he said, Jim, this isn't just negligence, it's abuse of power. If you're ready to fight, I'll take the case. For the first time in months, James felt hope, but he knew this was just the beginning. The HOA was powerful, connected, and vindictive. And the moment they found out he had hired a lawyer, they would come at him with everything they had got as he sat in his quiet living room that night, Linda by his side and Max sleeping at his feet. James asked himself the question that kept him awake. Am I really ready to go to war with my own neighbors? James's decision to bring in Tom, his army buddy turned attorney, set the stage for a showdown that would rock the entire neighborhood. When Tom first arrived at James's house, briefcase in hand and that same no-nonsense. Look, James remembered from deployment. The veteran felt like he finally had someone in his corner. They sat at the kitchen table while Linda poured coffee, and James laid out every document, every letter, every photograph of the damage. Tom flipped through the stack carefully. This isn't just sloppy work by the HOA. This is negligence. Plain and simple. And now they're retaliating against you with false violations. If they push this, we can countersue for damages and possibly more. James leaned back, relief mixed with fire in his chest. So I'm not crazy? No, Jim, Tom replied firmly. You're not crazy. You're a target, and they picked the wrong veteran to mess with. The following week, Tom sent a formal letter to the HOA board. It was sharp, precise, and left no room for misunderstanding. Cease all retaliation. Reimburse James Carter the $8,000 repair cost. Address the sewer line negligence. Or prepare for litigation. The response came quickly, and harshly, the HOA doubled down. They sent yet another notice, this time threatening fines of $100 a day until James's lawn met community standards. The mud pit they had caused was now being weaponized against him. James couldn't believe it. He showed the letter to Tom, who smirked. Perfect. This proves retaliation beyond a doubt. Let's use it. Meanwhile, word of James's fight was spreading through the neighborhood. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down were now stopping him on the street. Some whispered, "Good luck, Jim. We're rooting for you." Others, bolder now, told him their own horror stories, fines for kids' bikes left on porches, threats over the wrong shade of paint, even harassment for hosting family barbecues. At the next HOA meeting, things exploded. James didn't go alone. This time he walked in with Tom beside him and half a dozen neighbors trailing behind. The board members, Carol Green at the center, looked visibly shaken. Carol tried to maintain her composure. Mr. Carter, this meeting is for homeowners. Only attorneys are not permitted. Tom cleared his throat and spoke calmly but firmly. Actually, as Mr. Carter's legal representative, I'm allowed to be present. And judging by the number of violations your board has committed, you'll be seeing a lot more of me. Gasps rippled through the room. Carol's face turned red. This is inappropriate. Inappropriate? Tom cut her off. What's inappropriate is neglecting a sewer line that caused $8,000 in damage and then retaliating with false fines. You've overstepped your authority, and you know it. The room buzzed with murmurs. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably, whispering to each other. For the first time, the HOA board didn't look like the untouchable authority. They looked like cornered animals. James stood then, his voice calm but firm. I fought for this country so families could live free from fear and abuse. I never thought I'd have to fight that same battle in my own neighborhood. But make no mistake, I will fight. And I will win. The crowd erupted in applause. Some stood and clapped. Others shouted, "That's right." The HOA board sat frozen, their power slipping away before their very eyes. But the battle was far from over. Days later, James received notice that the HOA had officially filed for a lien on his property. It was their nuclear option. The threat to take his home. Linda found him sitting at the dining table with the letter in his hands, his jaw tight. They really did it, he whispered. She put her hand on his shoulder. So what happens now? James looked at her, eyes burning with determination. Now, we take them to court. And that's exactly what they did. The courtroom smelled of old wood and stale coffee. James sat at the plaintiff's table with Tom, while Carol and two other HOA board members sat across the aisle with their own attorney. The judge entered, stern and unimpressed, and the case began. Tom presented the evidence with precision, the plumber's report, the city inspector's findings, the letters of retaliation, and finally the lien notice. Each piece painted a picture of negligence, abuse, and arrogance. When Carol took the stand, she tried to spin the story. The association is simply enforcing community standards. Mr. Carter's property was in violation. Tom cut in sharply. Because of the damage your negligence caused. Isn't it true that the sewer line services multiple homes? Carol hesitated. Yes, but no buts, Mrs. Green. You ignored your duty. Forced a veteran to pay for repairs and then punished him further when he spoke up. That's not enforcement, that's retaliation. The judge's expression grew darker with each word. By the time closing arguments were made, the outcome felt clear. Still, James sat in silence, gripping Linda's hand as the judge delivered the verdict. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, James Carter. The HOA is ordered to reimburse the $8,000 repair cost, remove all retaliatory fines, and immediately cease further harassment. Furthermore, punitive damages in the amount of $12,000 are awarded to the plaintiff for emotional distress and abuse of authority. James exhaled, a weight lifting from his chest. Linda squeezed his hand, tears in her eyes. Neighbors who had attended the hearing erupted in cheers. Carol and the board sat in stunned silence, their empire crumbling. Outside the courthouse, James looked up at the sky. They thought they could break me, but they forgot I've been through worse, and I won't back down. He walked away with Linda at his side, knowing one thing for sure: he had won this battle, not just for himself, but for every neighbor who had ever been bullied by an HOA. And for the first time in months, James Carter finally felt at peace in his own home.
This was just one story, but the next one will be even more dramatic. Are you ready? Then you need to subscribe to HOA Stories 87 right now. Like this video, share it with your friends, and hit the bell because the next story might sound a little too close to home.